Hello, everybody, and welcome to the November edition of the Law for Black Lives webinar. We're super excited for y'all to join us after the long holiday. I hope everyone is stuffed and delicious. So tonight we're super excited. We have some amazing guests, organizers, academics, and thinkers to talk a bit about electoral justice. So we're calling it Beyond Voting, Reimagining Democracy. And I want to just start really briefly with an introduction to Law for Black Lives, and then we'll dig right into this dope group of panelists we have. So my name is Ma Bray Staley Butts. I'm the Director of Law for Black Lives. Law for Black Lives is a member-based organization. We have about 5,000 members across the country, lawyers, law students, and organizers who are committed to using the tools of the law to help liberate all people, and Black folks specifically. So we work kind of towards three major goals. One is Law for Black Lives works to transform the legal field. So we work with organizers, lawyers, and law students to really make sure that lawyers are using the law as a tool of liberation and not just kind of status quo exacerbation. I just made that up. But just generally trying to think about how do we make sure the law is a tool in our arsenal, but not the only tool towards liberation. So we do trainings across the country, webinars like this, and also create resources for folks. We also work to change the law and transform the law. So we work with groups across the country on issues of bail, reparations, decriminalization, and invest-divest to not only transform how lawyers show up, but also the actual laws that we're working with. And then lastly, we work to support base-building organizations. So we believe deeply that at the heart of any long-term sustainable change towards equality and liberation is organizing, is the power of people inside of movements to enact change, imagine change, and create change. And so we work across the country with groups to support their policy efforts, to support their protest efforts, and to support the strength of their organizing. And so really, we concern ourselves deeply with the question of power. How do we as lawyers and law students and organizers help to support the building of power of groups across the country and of people movements? And how do we sustain our power and implement it? So this webinar is really about the relationship between power and electoral politics. And so it is, of course, November. We have primaries happening today in Mississippi. Many of our folks across the country had their eyes glued on the midterm elections just a few weeks ago. And I think this webinar was meant to come in the aftermath of that to really talk about and challenge the ways in which electoral strategies are able to build power and the amazing work happening across the country to do that. The webinar is really focused on two kind of key areas. One is a zoom out. So thinking about what does it mean to use electoral strategies and tactics in this moment when so much of this system is rigged, from voter suppression laws to different types of laws that limit our democratic power. And so what really is the kind of ecosystem and the landscape for us to even use electoral politics in a meaningful way? And then secondly, to kind of zoom deeply in at a hyper-local level to see some of the amazing work that organizers across the country are doing to try and implement electoral strategies as part of a larger array of strategies to build power for the people, to hold officials accountable, and to do that kind of everyday work of starting to govern and practice governance and create structures for governance. And so we're super excited today to have a dope-ass panel of folks who will talk a bit about both this zooming out of what is the kind of landscape of electoral politics in this country, how the system in some ways is rigged against us, and then to zoom in on the dope work folks are doing to combat that reality and to build power locally. And so we are really excited for the panel and this discussion. We really invite folks to join us in the discussion through questions and their own experiences of electoral justice and politics. We know that many of us who are lawyers rely deeply on electoral strategies, while also acknowledging and knowing the limitations of those strategies and knowing that that is just the first step towards our larger vision of governance and liberation. And so we're excited to have folks who have thought lots about these issues and can dig into them. So we have three incredible panelists on right now. One is Ian Samuel, a professor at Indiana University, who wrote an incredible article in The Guardian, actually, that got all of our attention at the Law for Black Lives staff about just the ways that this system is rigged and how throughout the last 30 years or more, there has been a real sustained and successful attempt to build up kind of minority rule despite the waning the reigning popularity of the Republican Party, they continue to have a lot of power, and kind of why is that? And so Ian is going to talk to us a bit about his work and his thoughts and his insights around kind of how the system is rigged and how that happened. We also have Rihanna and Sekou, who are with the Community Oversight Now in Nashville, who just had an incredible victory locally around installing an oversight board. And I'm going to talk a bit about both that campaign and their work, but also how they understand electoral politics as part of a larger vision of liberation and accountability. So we're super excited. We're going to start actually with introductions from all the panelists to just share with us who they are, where they work from, and what brought them to this work. So we'll start with Rihanna, and then we'll move to Ian and Sekou.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Hi, my name is Rihanna. I'm in Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm with the Community Oversight Now Coalition, a member of SONG, Southerners on New Ground, and our chapter here that's doing work, not only supporting COB, but also launching into bail reform as our next step here in the state of Tennessee. I'm as well part of BLM as a Black Lives Matter member here in Nashville, as well as nationally. So I'm really glad to be here and ready to share with everyone.
Dope, thank you.
All right, my name is Ian Samuel. It is a real privilege to be with you all. I am a lawyer and a law professor. I'm a law professor at Indiana University, Morris School of Law. I have been a sort of writer and lawyer that's been writing about a lot of these things for a long time. As far as I'm aware, the sort of funnest fact I can share with you all is that I'm pretty sure I'm the only person to ever clerk for Justice Antonin Scalia who is a card-carrying American socialist. So it takes all kinds, and it is a real privilege to be here, and I'm really, really excited to talk about these things. So thank you very much for having me.
I love it. Thank you so much for that. Sekou?
Hi, I'm Sekou Franklin, and I'm with Community Oversight Now. I'm also with Democracy Nashville, which is a member coalition of Community Oversight Now, and have been doing work in Nashville really since I got to Nashville 15 years ago or so. I got involved with Community Oversight Now roughly around March of 2017. To work on a community oversight board proposal, initially trying to go through Metro Council. I've also worked with various groups in Tennessee, from the Tennessee NAACP to Tennessee Citizen Action, Tennessee Alliance for Progress, Ad Hoc Community for Equity, a number of different groups. By day, my job is I'm a professor at Middle Tennessee State University, and my research areas in particular are on race and politics, Black politics, civil rights, social movements, and I'm also the president-elect, of the National Conference of Black Political Scientists. So very much interested in connections between scholars and activists, particularly in the future.
I love it. Thank you so much, Sekou. And I think we also have Michelle Higgins on, who is our last panelist, who is from the St. Louis Action Council and the Electoral Justice Project for the Movement for Black Lives. So hi, Michelle. We're just doing really quick intros, name and what brought you to this walk. Michelle, you're on mute. It's the bottom left-hand corner. We got you.
Yay. Can you hear me?
We can.
Hey, y'all, it's really great to be here. St. Louis is my hometown, so it's wonderful to be a part of Action St. Louis, which is a member of the Movement for Black Lives, and it's great to work for the Electoral Justice Project as well. My focus is twofold in St. Louis, and hopefully one is see Black voter turnout become something that isn't the end all be all, but something that, like Marbrae said, we are using. Our other piece is really challenging elected officials beginning when they are put into office. And so I'm excited that Action St. Louis is moving from woke voter That's one of our standing campaigns. And our other standing campaign is Close the Workhouse. And right now we are demanding that elected officials, our circuit attorney, who is elected, and we're demanding that they not only decarcerate, but actually pursue something towards abolition. So electoral justice is one of the stronger tools that we're using directly towards liberation. And it's a long, hard, but very exciting time locally. So it's good to be here.
Okay, thank you so much, Michelle. So we're going to dig right in, just some quick tips, pro tips. If you are not talking, please stay on mute. And then also, if you have your headphones in, that's often the best way to enjoy our webinar. We also will be taking questions throughout. So if you have a pressing question, we'll have about 15 minutes at the end for questions. But you can also share any questions you have in the chat box, and we will try and answer them as we go. So I'm going to start with Ian, just for this Zoom out we talked about, to talk a bit about some of your reflections and some background about how the right has been in the process of installing what you call a permanent minority rule in this country, and what that looks like, both in terms of voter suppression, but also manipulation of the kind of legislative maps. And so just kind of the background on your work and your thoughts around this moment and the possibilities of electoral politics.
Yeah, absolutely right. And so when I say minority rule, what I mean is, like, look, the Republican Party and the American right have control of the American government, even though we all know the actual number of human beings in this country who actually supports their political program is very small. Like, it's not even like 55-45. It's much smaller than that. And so how exactly is it that we find ourselves in a position where the Republican Party and the American right control the White House? They control now only one of the houses of Congress, but a pretty important one. They have a sort of death grip on the court system. How did we get into that position? And so I think we all know at this point about voter suppression, right? That is a very effective tactic. That is one, but only one, very loathsome tactic in this effort. Right. So, for example, in North Dakota, right, in 2012, Heidi Heitkamp, who's a Democrat, wins this surprise victory in a Senate race by like 3,000 votes. And her two biggest county wins are in the Standing Rock and Turtle Mountain reservations. She wins more than 80% of the vote there. And her overall margin in these counties containing native reservations is about 4,500 votes. So the Republican Party in North Dakota observes that Heidi Heitkamp literally owes her seat to Native voters, and they enact this voter ID law that requires voters to present identification showing their name, birth date, and residential address, knowing damn well that many Native voters do not have residential addresses, that live on reservations. This law effectively disenfranchises them, okay? And of course, we don't even talk about Georgia, right, where the Republican nominee for governor held 50,000 voter registrations on hold, mostly in urban areas with very high Black populations, and was very concerned about people voting. Now, voter suppression is just one part of that thing, though. So exacerbating that is the effect of partisan gerrymandering, the redrawing of electoral maps to favor one party rather than the other. And the example I like to use here is Wisconsin. Right, so after the 2010 census, the Wisconsin legislature, which was controlled by Republicans, drew this map for the state legislature that explicitly was designed to ensure that they would win most of the seats in the state legislature, even if they won a minority of votes, right? And it worked. So in 2012, they won 48% of the votes, and they won 60 of 99 seats. Democrats in the Wisconsin won an outright majority in 2012 in votes cast. They got 39 seats, 30 versus 60, okay? And this, of course, with the new power that they had, they added what else? A voter ID requirement that was designed to make it harder to vote at all. And voila, voter turnout in the 2016 presidential election is the lowest since 2000, and Donald Trump carries the state, not because the working people of Wisconsin are in love with the banking class, but because it was extraordinarily difficult to vote there, and because that was exactly the idea, right? Then you add to that the fact that we have in America this unique international institution, the Electoral College. And I know that we all know about the Electoral College, but I just want to point something out that I think that is too under-discussed. In my lifetime, so I was born in 1983, in my lifetime, the two most recent Republican presidents have both entered office despite receiving fewer votes than their opponent in a national election, thanks to the Electoral College, which systematically overrepresents small states and rural states, right? So California gets one electoral vote per 700,000 people. Wyoming gets one every 195,000 people. And then you get the presidency in hand, and you can run the census, right? You can run the census in a weird way that is designed to undercount, for example, undocumented people and things like that by adding a citizenship question that then undercounts the population, which means that areas with high concentrations of undocumented people are undercounted in Congress and don't have as much influence. And then you add, to my view, the worst thing of all, the Senate, right? The Senate should be the enemy of every good human being in this country because it is 2 senators per state, no matter how big or small, right? So a resident of Wyoming, and I have nothing against Wyoming. I'm from Colorado. It's a perfectly nice place. It is 66 times the representation in the Senate as a person in California, right? So in 2016, the Democratic Party got 51 million votes for its Senate candidates, and the Republicans got 40 million. And despite losing by more than 11 million votes, the Republican Party won a supermajority, 22 of 36 of the seats that were up for election, and that was enough to hold the majority in the chamber. And of course, from there, they can confirm justices. Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh were nominated by a president who won fewer votes than everybody else, and were confirmed by Senate candidates who got fewer votes than everybody else, and then they strike down voter ID laws. So, this is a big problem, and especially at the national level, things look especially bad. And that is why I'm so excited to be talking with people who are local activists, where, I think, direct electoral power is more meaningful and is more significant, and thinks we can do things. And so, the big idea here is the national level, the federal government is gerrymandered for minority rule and always has been. And so if we are going to think about any kind of electoral justice and any kind of democratic justice, it has to start about thinking that the structures that were designed in the late 18th century might not be designed to promote the kind of ends of justice that we really care about. So that's a very high level view, but I'll yield the floor from there.
That's super helpful. I wonder too if you could just touch on the kind of judiciary, so the way in which also this has resulted in stacking the judiciary towards a limited voter kind of mentality.
Yeah, sure. So that's actually the kind of most dangerous part, right? So in 2013, so you might think the Supreme Court, the courts are whatever, right? Like the legislature passes the law, the courts are kind of functionaries administering it. Far from it. So the Voting Rights Act was one of the most signal achievements of the civil rights movement in the 1960s, right? It, for example, placed under national supervision jurisdictions that had systematically denied the right to vote on the basis of race and said, look, for example, if you're going to close down polling places, or if you're going to move polling places, or if you're going to change registration dates, or things like that, all these tactics that we all know about, you have to get approval in advance from the national government, from from the Justice Department, or from a national court or something like that. The Supreme Court in 2013 said that the states that were covered by that hadn't been updated recently enough. The case is Shelby County v. Holder. Shelby County, Alabama, was the jurisdiction that brought this. And so actually struck down major portions of the Voting Rights Act. And they came within one vote of invalidating independent redistricting commissions, where, for example, the district lines, so anti-gerrymandering efforts, in other words, where the districts aren't drawn just by the politicians who are going to be elected in them. The Supreme Court can actually, and the lower courts, can actually invalidate kind of like pro-democracy, majority rule measures. And they have. And that is a very scary thought, because if you can't win at the ballot box, and if you can't enact laws that promote democratic accountability, then you have a real problem on your hands. You have a sort of tiny minority of the country running things, and the Supreme Court kind of protecting those privileges. That is a serious problem. And so that is really what we face at the national level. And, we need to square up to that, I think.
Thank you so much for those insights. So I want to move to Michelle really quickly and thinking about kind of in light both of the way that this system has become and has always been, to your point, and deeply rigged. What is the work of the Electoral Justice Project and the work in St. Louis to really connect elections and think about elections as part of a Black liberation strategy and a more intersectional strategy of liberation? And specifically, what do you see as kind of the possibilities and the limitations of elections? Just for simple, easy questions, right?
You know, I'm just going to go through them 20 seconds each. No problem. I think some of the limitations are in many ways obvious and often sadly laid out for us when we strive for electoral power. When we say that Black and brown votes matter, the minute that we go to claim our rights, suppression is so real. It's so real that Mississippi Rising put up a voter suppression story bank ahead of the polls opening this morning to make sure that everybody had a place to go and put their stories of voter suppression. The other mass limitation is the two-party system itself. And again, we've got this laid out for us by the professor here, who is so deftly made clear that there are gatekeepers. And I believe that that's a huge reason why we have to go hyper-local in order for us to build the masses, which is, to me, one of the most beautiful pieces of Black liberation. The struggle itself is to return power to the people. And the people in the US, especially in marginalized communities, are by and large Black and brown. And so Black liberation requires that electoral justice look like funding. It has to look like putting power, and whatever power we can manipulate that is in the electoral system right now. The Electoral Justice Project nationally moves. This year we moved 35 grants that were local, on the ground, all moving in 25 different states to push, to forward the movement for electoral justice. And so whenever we have funds, whenever we have resources, we move those resources intentionally to Black movement. And Black movement is what spreads in this hyperlocal way to then impact the people around them. So very specifically, if we are not in an election year, chances are high that my hyperlocal focus of my Close the Workhouse team in the city of St. Louis that's looking to make sure that the 89% of inmates in our medium security institution who are pre-trial and or can't afford bail. They have a court date, but they can't fight the case from home just because they're poor. So we're criminalizing poverty. Money bail is unconstitutional. And 89% of the people in my local jail are just rotting away, in part because they also don't have yard time. There's no gym time. Now that's a long story, but it goes to show that that's what we're working on when it's not an election year. There's an election year coming up in 2019 locally, and we want to see a ballot measure that requires city legislators to address this particular problem. That hyperlocal focus will draw people out who are related to those most impacted as they are impacted too. It will draw people out who claim to be humanitarians. It will draw people out who claim to be liberals, but they're literally sitting just left of racist. And so we are trying to push people in a system that does create limitations. St. Louis is considered a democratic town, but you really can be quite racist and make it here and succeed. But we're trying to push people who claim to be progressive into radical attention of Black people, especially the working class. And I think that those things, they don't just engage people in non-election years. They engage people the minute the election is over, because now we have to move towards accountability. Now I have to canvass and make sure that the circuit attorney that I helped put in office does what she said she was going to do when she was feeling really good and campaigning and had all the Black folks and the activists helping her out. So I think that there are different levels, and the hyperlocal focus is fed well by the national project to move funds and resources into the places where people on the ground know much better than people around the country that are just phoning in. But I think it's also on the broader scale, our hope is to, one, reduce harm, right? We all know that that's what voting and electoral processes does, but we also intend to change the material conditions of our people. And that can happen through our demands and our active function as a community. If we show up in droves, we can push back anti-trans legislation. We can work to push to have, 1 in 5 Black people in the state of Florida who were disenfranchised from voting. We can push as a community to get even the people who were on the margins who might have never voted that way. Our community makes demands and we make them strongly, to the point where you have folks who would have never thought that the vote should be returned to folks returning citizens from prison, and they're clicking yes, they're saying okay, because the material conditions are rising to the surface. And to me, that begins to change not just what the culture is, but how we envision the culture of the United States should be.
Ashe, thank you so much for those powerful words. So I want to go quickly to both Sekou and Rihanna around the walk in Nashville. And so if you guys can talk us through your strategy around elections and police accountability, and describe your campaign and why you decided to take this specific approach. And again, what the possibilities and limitations of an electoral approach are in Nashville.
Sekou, I'll start with some background history and you'll come. Okay, cool. Awesome. So this initiative, this campaign, was definitely not an electoral campaign when we first started out. This actually really arose out of tragedy. I was currently working in James Casey Homes, which is a public housing site here in Nashville, one of the biggest, is the biggest one in the city, and is historically one of the largest ones here. And there was a shooting of Jacquees Clemens, 35 years old, in that housing. And previous years, our police chief we have a super PR friendly police department, and had been spreading all of these things across the country, even about how progressive our police force was and how we are not Ferguson and this will never happen. And like, in the midst of all these different groups decrying, like, no, like things are going on, things are happening in the city. And they were so adamant about that until Jacquees was shot here in Nashville, which obviously wasn't the first time they've shot someone. But in the wake of this movement for Black Lives Matter moment, that was our huge thing that happened in early 2017. And one of the huge demands that we were pushing, along with less police in public housing, was a community oversight board, which was something that was a demand that came from the family, that came from community groups around, like, what do we do when the police actually cannot be counted on to investigate themselves? We actually had a huge scandal here where the police chief and the police department got caught manipulating and in the investigation, and the state had to be brought in to do another investigation. That Officer Lipper, got acquitted in the case. But it definitely, people didn't forget that process and all that went into it. And so a fight that was really centered around trying to be heard, trying to get our council members and people to listen to us, really came to a head when we did a huge city council shutdown. So a shout out to direct action. I think a lot of times people think it's either one or the other, but our campaign is such a great snapshot of how grassroots organizing and people who are doing direct action on the ground has been able to galvanize people and build into a larger campaign that we were able to say that we won. And so starting from that city council shutdown, people were really paying attention and like, we are not going away. Like, they thought we were just going to disappear and not follow through on what we said. And from that, we started engaging council members around, we want a community oversight board, and people were not supportive of us. We had a council fight that really did not pan out. Council members that did not want to vote for this. And so we decided we're going to take it to the ballot. we're going to take it to the people of Nashville because we know and we trust that our people know what's going on in the streets and that this is a grassroots effort that our people would get behind. And so Sekou, that was like a very concise history. But Sekou and a lot of other folks that came together built a coalition of different community organizations that were kind of those first people, those first catalysts, fire starters. And we're like, okay, how do we run a campaign? How do we explore this electoral playing field in a way that our city officials and our police departments can't deny because the people have voted for this. And so being able to really use the electoral strategy to be able to put our elected officials and our other people that were in opposition in a chokehold around actually doing the will of the people. And so, I have so much to say. I'm like bursting. I'm trying to get it all in. But Sekou, is there anything that you want to add to kind of contextualize some of what I just described?
Yeah, I can add to that. As Rihanna stated, the idea for a community oversight board came out of the Jacques Clemens killing, what happened to him in Casey Holmes, and the demand from public housing residents and activists, a lot of Black women. And the idea of a community oversight board has been around in Nashville for 40 years. So there's been various attempts by various groups to push it. And this was just the right moment, the right time, probably for reasons that we're all trying to figure out maybe later on. So that happened in February of 2017. And immediately after that, we pulled together a coalition of various groups: Gideon's Army, Showing Up for Racial Justice, Black Lives Matter, Democracy Nashville, the Music City Riders United group, which was a bus riders union, was initially part of it. We had the Tennessee and ACP came in with some resources. Later on, Song joined the coalition. No Prisoners Exception Collective, led by insiders and outsiders, as a part of the coalition, and Justice for Jacques. So the idea was to initially push for a council ordinance, a council law, and it took us a while to build community capacity. And it was hard to really build that community capacity because traditionally some of the liberal advocacy groups are used to kind of a brokerage politics, kind of an elite brokerage politics. I think many of your viewers understand that, where they get in the room and they negotiate dividends and benefits on behalf of the most affected communities. So there was a lot of resistance to our kind of style and mode of operation from some of the liberal advocacy groups that are on our side, but they're used to kind of negotiating those issues in elite circles. And we did push for a council bill in November of 2017, and immediately there was a pushback from the Fraternal Order of Police, a pretty vociferous, dogmatic pushback, and the council ordinance was defeated in January of 2018. From the very beginning, we had talked about as a last-minute option, as a last-stop option of pushing for a charter referendum. So after January 2018, we began to talk about a charter referendum. Some of us had been involved in a charter referendum before in 2015 with the Ban the Box charter referendum, so we had some experience in that. So we pulled together our collective minds and looked at the council ordinance that was written, and we put together a charter referendum, and we sent it to some attorneys. Erica Perry, I think, was a part of that as well. Law for Black Lives Matter helped out with that in terms of reviewing the charter, going over it, revising it. So probably in the end, 4 or 5 attorneys looked at that charter referendum, and we launched a petition drive on April 4th, which was the 50th observance of Dr. King's assassination. And we had to collect a certain number of petitions based upon the legality of the charter. And so if you look at our campaign, we had a council ordinance strategy, we had a petition drive strategy to collect petitions, in which we literally put together a template for how to collect petitions, how to hold meetings, how to do door knocking, different scripts, how to get churches involved. We literally had a town hall meeting just for that, and we put together a strategy strategy process for that. And then once the petitions were submitted, we had to essentially develop another strategy for legal review. And so for the audience and from the Law for Black Lives, this is important because we had to survive a legal challenge from the opponents of the charter. So what we did was we actually got support at that time from Black Voter Matters, and Black Voter Matters allowed us to. They provided some resources to hustle. You guys know the Hustle app, right? So we hustled 8,000 voters in August and September to call the mayor and put pressure on the mayor and say, have your Metro Legal Department defend this petition. Out of 8,000 people that we hustled, 162 people responded. And that was because of our connections with Black Voter Matters. So you can see that this is all before the election took place. This is all before any of this took place. So when we launched the campaign, officially launched the campaign in late August, we had a great campaign manager, Jacola Lane, who was the initial protest, one of the initial protesters at the February 2017 protest that Rihanna and Justice Jacques folks led. And so she did a brilliant job in leading our campaign. And just to kind of walk you through parts of the campaign just briefly. So the campaign, I would say, probably took elements of a Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party strategy combined with kind of a new age kind of campaigning. So, we had groups that cut turf. We had door knocking. The last week and a half of the campaign, I counted 9 various canvassing efforts. The great part of our campaign was that we had Community Oversight Now was leading its own outreach effort, door knocking, phone banking, text mobilization. But we also had groups that were in line with us that were also doing parallel campaigns in different parts of the city, cutting their own turf, using their own vote bidder databases. So we had Song, for example, was in East Nashville, cutting turf for 6 weeks, showing up for racial justice, was targeting strictly working class whites in the Madison area. So that is showing up for racial justice and the Democratic Socialist Association. Indivisible came in and cut turf. Workers' Dignity, which is primarily comprised of Latinos, including undocumented residents, cut turf. Tennessee Immigrant Refugee Rights Coalition canvassed for us as well. We had the American Muslim Advisory Council that did events. So it was a community-based effort. I would probably say, if I can, in terms of the broader campaign, if you ask people in our coalition to describe the campaign, you're probably going to get different results. Even people who've been working together for 20 months, different answers, 20 months. From my perspective, my own individual perspective, it was a nonviolent campaign. And from my perspective, some of the things we did, for example, was not just to do traditional campaign stuff, but we organized events, actions. The veterans organizations, the Veterans for Peace and Veterans for Community Oversight Board delivered a letter to the mayor and asked to meet the mayor without permission. So we did various events like that as a way to leverage what nonviolent activists call the social roots of pressure. So from my perspective, it was an electoral justice campaign that was rooted in nonviolent resistance, that is the science of nonviolence, not just direct action, but the broader terrain of what nonviolent resistance is in terms of the science, social roots of power. And from my perspective, the leadership development that came out of the campaign, primarily by people who were under 40 years old, under 35 years old, the working class politics that encompass the campaign, that is everyday people, students, women, LGBTQ groups, immigrant groups. To me, that is the heart and soul of of why we won.
Ashe, thank you all so much. It's so invigorating to hear about the amazing victories and just the way also that kind of the agility of our movements to think about how do we actually get what we want and using all the tactics in our toolbox to do that. So much love to y'all in Nashville and St. Louis for what you're building and the work you're doing. And shout out to Michelle for the liberals just left with racist, which I'm going to start using in my entire life. So we'll do one more round of questions, and then I see one question in the chat box, but if other folks have questions, you have a chance after this round to ask them. So I want to start again with Ian and just ask you, you laid out a pretty dire landscape of incredibly effective tactics of repression and suppression, as well as kind of rigging the entire system. So I'm curious for you, what do you think can be done and should be done to start kind of fighting against that rigged system and the last few decades of progress on the right to do that?
Yeah, so a few things. Number one, I think the most significant group of human beings that can play a part in this process that are not playing a part in the process now is people who, for good reason, do not vote or participate in the process at all, because they find themselves to be faced with kind of unpalatable or disgusting choices, right? So the most significant group of people in 2016, for example, are not the people who voted for Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, but the people who did not vote at all or could not vote at all, right? So the first step of the process is to overwhelm the assumptions of the enemy. All the assumptions of the enemy have led to the gerrymandering as it exists now, but I simply do not believe that the people of North Carolina, for example, or the people of North Dakota, for that matter, are fundamentally committed to the privileges of the banking class, right? I just don't believe that. I don't believe that people living in Pierre, South Dakota are motivated primarily by racial grievance, even though that is the party that they vote for most of the time. Most of the people who live there don't vote at all. And so some kind of political strategy that can engage people who quite rightly feel that the political process has nothing to offer them is, I think, essential, right? That is the first thing, because you must overwhelm the barricades, you must overwhelm the levees they have built. The second thing I would say that can be done is it is not enough to resist restricting the franchise. Right, so the American right loves to restrict the franchise, make it harder to vote, restrict the class of people who can vote, disenfranchise people who have committed things the law considers felonies, make it so you have to have a residential address in North Dakota to vote, things like this. They love to do that. It's not enough to say, no, let's not do that. We should say, let's expand the franchise, right? So let's say, for example, the state of California or the state of New York or the state of Illinois or any state, Colorado, any place, or, Tennessee, any place could do the following thing tomorrow. They could say, all residents of this state, citizen or non-citizen, documented or undocumented, all residents of this state, 16 years or older, may vote in all elections. And that decision would be effective in all state and federal elections. The state of California or New York or any place else could decide tomorrow that a 16-year-old undocumented kid living in San Bernardino can vote for president, can vote for senator, can vote for House of Representatives, can vote for everything. The Constitution absolutely guarantees them that right. And so we must push on the offensive to expand the franchise because, the enemy has set up certain barricades. And so we must build a force that can overwhelm those barricades. And so we need more people in the army, and we can expand those people. So we shouldn't stop at saying, oh yes, all 18-year-old people who aren't felons and, blah, blah, blah. No. That is thinking, I think, way too small. My ideal vision of the world is look, as a compromise, I will say, all 16-year-old residents of every state may vote without respect to immigration status, without respect to whether they have ever done anything the law considers a crime or blah, 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 whether you're in prison, out of prison, whether you are anything. If you're 16 years old and you live in a place, you get to vote. I think that would be a powerful and transformative thing, and we should be pushing for that because once you do that, then you will be able to elect people to national office who believe in those things. That is how, for example, in the United States, we got the right for all women to vote. It didn't start with the 19th Amendment. Right now, the 19th Amendment guarantees all women in the United States get the right to vote. But didn't start there. It started with Wyoming, and I think Oregon or Washington, that said, we're going to, in the particular circumstances of our state, allow all women to vote. And then they elected people who believed in the rights of women to vote. No kidding, because it's hard to get elected in a place where women can vote, where you don't believe in that kind of thing. And so those representatives went to Congress and they started agitating. They started making trouble, necessary trouble. And we could do the same thing. We could do the exact same thing with all residents rather than all citizens. We could do the same thing with 16-year-olds rather than 18-year-olds. We could do the same thing with all people rather than all people who have never been, rounded up for some meaningless crime the law considers a felony. We could do that. We have to overwhelm the barricades. And so we have to be thinking big. We have to go on offense, and we can do that. And so that is what I hope we will organize toward. That is the kind of thing local power can really achieve, because the federal government cannot stop that. They can't. And so the kind of local victories that people have been talking about give me so much hope, because that is where we have to start. And so that is where I would like to start.
Ashe, I love this overwhelming the barricades. And shout out to San Medina, where I'm from. So we thank you for that.
Oh, yeah.
Dope. So I want to move on to everyone else on the panel, just around this question of how does your work build power? And so I think folks touched on this, but how do you see this electoral victory as the beginning or the continuation of what is a power building strategy, and how will you defend it? And Michelle, would love to hear a bit more. We didn't get into kind of the specifics of the amazing work in St. Louis, but feel free to share that as kind of an example and illustration of how it builds power.
Okay, yeah, so specifically this year, we ran a campaign called Buy Bob, and that hashtag was built around the attorney, the chief prosecutor in the county of St. Louis, who most of us would know famously announced that there was no bill on Darren Wilson. It's been a rough day in St. Louis. One of our best videographers and live streamers passed away. We're not sure when, but he was found today. And so it's a crazy time for us. We really need to huddle around and really hold each other in the face of a lot of re-traumatization, considering the tear gassing and inhumane treatment at the border, and how that brings out so much of our decision to focus locally, because we know that change has to happen nationally. And so Bob McCullough was in office for 27 years, rarely opposed, if ever opposed, and had the hardest stance on low-level offenses, and chose to make examples of people like Ferguson protester Josh Williams, who he locked up for 8 years after this kid turned himself in for being party to some of the pieces of looting that went on after the no bill. And so Bob McCullough is literally the reason that Josh is behind bars for 8 years and has now served more time in jail than Darren Wilson, who murdered Michael Brown. So the people wanted to be the reason that Bob McCullough doesn't have a job anymore. And St. Louis County is, I want to say, 80 plus municipalities. Our region is about 1.5 million people, and we have 80 courts. And so outside of the city of St. Louis, you could drive 4.5 miles, and if you have parking tickets, you could get stopped 4 different times in different municipalities and end up sitting in municipality to municipality to municipality until you have no more money. And again, you've been criminalized because you are poor, not because you are committing crime. And McCullough was the chief prosecutor for making sure people like that stayed behind bars for low to no offense. So the victory there was shocking to us. We knew we wanted it. We knew we could do it. But it took 30 canvassers each in 3 different groups. It took collaborative efforts of, I love the way Sekou was talking about cutting turf, because that was our bread and butter. How do we cut turf around and concentrated on different munis, knowing that the court system that is run in a municipality that has like the tiniest one sheriff for 50 miles or 15 miles who goes around to different municipalities, how do we pressure and advise and educate people about what their rights are. I think the biggest piece of what gives me hope about this massive achievement is that the people who pushed someone out now know exactly what they want. The people who pushed to get white supremacy out, now expect concentration on Black liberation and Black empowerment in order for us to get back in. Similar to what the people in Mississippi are doing. They're rising up and they're saying, we're not going to let anybody forget what Cindy Hyde-Smith said. She's talking out her neck, and we're not going to let you forget that. And I think it takes those folks, that power, the masses. And to me, that gives me some hope, despite the fact that it doesn't always seem like people are pushing down the national barricade. It's really important for us to see the barriers that are local and to run them. And that's what the people of St. Louis County did.
Well, thank you so much for that. Rhiannon and Sekou, do y'all have any thoughts around this, around how the strategy y'all have implemented is building power and how you continue to build power even now that you've won?
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. I think, we're in Tennessee, so let's not be remiss about that. We're in a red state. Marsha Blackburn was still elected as our senator. Bill Lee is our governor now. And so, although we all were red all the way around the ballot, I think a really huge thing that we were able to change, we built so much narrative power, and we built power around people who did not believe that you couldn't run a campaign on $17,000 versus the FOP who spent $500,000, and that we would win a campaign with people and grassroots people raising money. And the NAACP and Black Voters Matter that came in and supported us. Like, our everyday people saw that, wow, these Goliaths that have huge institutional money and backing, not only from the FOP, from the Republican Party, from people outside of the state that had huge bank that were funding our failure, and they still lost. I think that's a huge message to people about, like, and that feels like a really powerful thing, I think, because particularly for most people who are in red states, who are in more rural areas, who are in places where, the status quo is we don't have any money, we don't have any resources, half our people are locked up in jail. How are we going to get people to come out and vote that don't ever vote? Like, all these questions of we could never do, and people saw it happen, is still mind-boggling for me in a lot of ways. And I would say the piece around narrative power that we built, the FOP was really playing a hard, aggressive line against this oversight board in a way that I think even turned people who were maybe pro-police off, right? And that they were telling lies about what our legislation was actually about, who was funding it, how much it was going to cost people. And I think that as a coalition, we were able to make a sound communication strategy by utilizing people's spoken word and written word around opt-eds, different people from different demographics that were able to speak up. We had police officers that spoke up for us on our behalf, right? And so there was just so many people from so many different places that were able to lend their narrative to why this was so important. And so I really feel like people really seize that opportunity to be able to see the way that the media and other people were working for us, and to highlight the ways in which this institution was really trying to destroy everyday people, right? We had gone through all the proper channels that people say that you should go through, right? And this was our final test of, like, okay, we've done this. This is what people want. Are you going to deny the people of the things that they said that they wanted? And there still are. We did win the election, and we're still getting sued and being taken to the Tennessee Supreme Court. So we have a huge legal battle ahead of us. We're still trying to raise money to be able to take care of that legal battle. And so our power now is, like, people know we have the power to rise up, and we're still tapping on folks to plug in. Now we're in the stage where we got to fill our board. And we want it to be representative of the people that we said it was for. We don't want to get co-opted and have people that don't actually believe in and the people who built this on the front lines. And so we're still negotiating and thinking through a lot of different things around abolition, around what does governance look like on this level, because people have never seen it. We've never seen it. And so we're still experimenting. And there's still so much that still we're in the weeds about. But I definitely believe and I feel and I know that the more that people see us pushing, that we're continually build power and empower people to want to participate in what we have going on. So it's exciting in that way.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Deanna. Sekou, do you want to share other ways that your work in this campaign has really been building power, and also looking to the future, what you hope this strategy will allow in terms of governance and power building?
Well, institutional power can be won and lost. And so we can get a COB or we can win an election, and it could be lost 5 or 10 years from now. So I like to talk about other kinds of power that came out of this election that I think is important. And the number one is leadership development. And for the campaign and petition drive to get the referendum, we had at least 8 voices in the media intentionally. That is, 8 people were constantly giving interviews. It wasn't a traditional 1 or 2 or 3 spokespersons. And it was a broad range of people across race and also across age. The COB effort, the COB, us winning in Nashville is not in a vacuum. It's St. Louis, it's Florida with the enfranchisement of formerly incarcerated persons. It's Black Voter Matters Fund going through 7 southern states in rural communities, tapping into groups that are historically ignored. And so the power is in movement borrowing, that is borrowing from various movements, movement sharing, and not seeing a dichotomy between what some call protest and politics, or what some might call grassroots organizing and electoral politics. It's making sense of the two and how they can reinforce each other as long as they're around a narrative of justice, and really instilling that in movement culture. The COB, in terms of the other 2 things, is I think the narrative in terms of the power narrative is trying to still argue with grassroots folks that you can make change even if you don't know it, because what you have in you is a creative energy, a creative potential to experiment, and you'll find out what the right thing is to do as long as you continue to struggle and push forward on and on and on. And now that we have the COB, it's as I talked to a person who today, a very prominent African American woman, Black woman, she said, this is Nashville's experiment in participatory governance. And this process right now, literally compared to the last 50 years, is the most important example or display of participatory governance. How it goes, we don't know. All I know is that the same intensity to mobilization that occurred in February 2017, that occurred in November 2017, hitting the streets, holding people accountable, bringing pressure to bear, is going to be the same kind of intensity to make sure that this experiment in participatory governance is not an experiment in co-optation. So right now, the Community Oversight Board has to be implemented by January 31st in terms of the board, staff by March 31st, and a special appropriation that can last to the end of the fiscal year, and then $1.5 million. And then the global context that is outside of Nashville, outside of the implementation of COB, is, as Rihanna stated, there's still a court challenge. The Fraternal Order Police is trying to overturn the election, and that probably will make its way to the Supreme Court of Tennessee even 6 months from now. Number 2 is that the state of Tennessee could still come in the legislature and preempt or partially preempt the Community Oversight Board. So that's a possibility too as well. So we're battling on multiple fronts to make sure that this experiment, participatory governance, matters a great deal. So, so those are some of my examples in terms of I think it was in terms of the lessons were we had an interesting thing with the Community Oversight Board. I'll take my last lesson. I promise you, in many conversations that I had with established leadership, black and white, or many conversations that I heard from established leadership, black and white, either explicit or implicit, this was a narrative. The Oversight Board is only supported by black folks. 28% of Nashville black folks, and only not even the majority of that. So in our discussions with grassroots folks, it didn't enter our discussion. Our experience was, we see BLM hitting the streets since 2015. We see showing up for racial justice. We see the workers' identity, organizing Latinos in particular. We see song. During the petition drive, we reached out to the Jewish Roundtable. We had the American Muslim Advisory Council. We had the Democratic Socialist Association, even the Libertarian Party. So our experience was something entirely different from the established leadership and the political experts, literally. And so this election showed that you can build multiracial power, cross-sector power, led principally by black folk. That is a multiracial cross-sector movement led principally by black folk, in which the roots of that came out the soil of Nashville's poorest community, the housing projects of KC. And that's what this movement in Nashville showed.
Yes, thank you so much for that, Reverend. Thank you. So we're going to open it up. We have about 15 minutes left. If anyone has questions, there's one question from Ray Calloway in the box of, do you have any information regarding criminal ramifications for rigging those voting computer systems in favor of Republicans? So that's one question, but want to also invite anyone else either in the box, or you can raise your hand if you want to ask a question of any of the panelists. So I don't know if anyone has answer to that first question around the voting computer systems.
Are you waiting for me to speak, or are you still doing something else?
Oh, no, I thought that was your question, Ray. Is that the right question? Hi.
Well, I did have the question. Did you guys get my email for one? And I did ask that question about civil and criminal ramifications. I'm trying to start an organization. I live in the state of Texas, and it's the most corrupt place I've ever been in my life. Mm-hmm. I grew up in San Francisco, California, which is international cultural diversity. Why are we as black people begging these public elected officials to enforce our nationwide federal laws? I was state government, and I was unlawfully terminated for filing nationwide federally protected class complaints. And I went through the process. And the thing in Texas, we have a lot of issues with it's called race color discrimination, where if I'm African American and my manager is African American and you discriminate, it's not race discrimination, it's race color discrimination. You can see that on EEOC.gov. And so talking about this election time, okay, that's just, I have a whole bunch of pictures because I'm a civil rights activist as well, and plus a life member of the NAACP in San Francisco. The NAACP in Texas is sorry, but I'm gonna move on from past that. But anyway, I have a lot of pictures of police brutality and the police beating up on people with bloody, the black man and those sicking dogs. I have a lot of those pictures. So that's why I'm trying to start an organization called the Children from the 1964 Civil Rights Movement. And so using those pictures to show how they were killing people back in the day. That's why you have the 4th Amendment of the Constitution. You have the 14th Amendment. You also have the nationwide federal protective law under the Hate Crime Act, 1968 Hate Crime Act. Why are we begging these fools to enforce or getting permission to enforce these laws? That's beyond me. I am 57 years old, and I was blessed I'm talking about immensely blessed in California, where I have 30 plus years in the information technology department, and then I moved to Texas, working for the state government. Then, you know what I mean? I'm sick and tired of us having to beg these public elected officials to enforce nationwide federal laws. I was state government. I don't deal with no state laws. I deal with nationwide because I was state government. And the EEOC is not enforcing these laws either. So that's what I'm saying.
Administration. Thank you so much for that question. I feel like there were a few questions in there, and also just sending you a lot of luck with your organization and the walk in Texas, which I know is an uphill battle for sure. So I just want to see if any of the panelists have a response to Ray's comments, and also this question around, if like these, especially these computer systems that may be criminal, if there's any kind of ramifications for that or oversight over that. So let's start there, and thank you again, Ray, for joining us and for the question and just the thoughts and reflections around the state of Texas and generally the federal government's enforcement of civil rights.
Yeah, did y'all get my email too, by the way, before we move on? Did y'all get my email?
Let's check. I think Kim might be monitoring the inbox, so she will respond to you if she got it in the inbox.
Great.
So,
thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Ray.
Yeah, I guess I have a few thoughts. I don't want to preempt anybody, but I have some. There was a lot there, but I have some thoughts.
Give it to us.
So, to me, the most fragile thing about a sort of electoral democracy is like the confidence of the human beings who participate in it, that it is like legit and on the level. And I don't blame anybody who thinks that like when they go to a polling place and they're like marking a box or they're like touching the screen or whatever, that they have some suspicion that like, is this really on the level? Right? Like I read, just like everybody else did, all these Texas voters who said, look, I voted straight party, and then it like, got like messed around with at the end. Is that on the level? And the answer is, I don't know, and neither does anybody else. And so to me, what this says is that like the reason we don't know if it's on the level, and the reason nobody can have real confidence if it's on the level is these are administered by private companies. Right, like Diebold and all these other places. Like, if there is anything in the United States that should absolutely be nationalized, and like, look, I'm a card-carrying socialist. I think almost everything should be nationalized. But if there is anything that should be nationalized, it is the administration of elections to national office. It is just unbelievable that what we do is we contract to a bunch of private people. We don't know if their software is secure. We don't know if it's good. They might make mistakes. Like, it's unbelievable that we ask normal people like Ray to believe in the system that like is just controlled by these. Look, I assume well-meaning. I don't think they're malefactors. I think that they're doing the best they can, but it's just a gig, man. They're just working at Diebold. They're trying to get their paycheck, go home, hug their baby, like have a drink. It's crazy to me. It really is. That we don't have a system that is run top to bottom by public authorities, so we can all have like transparency and accountability to it, so we can at least say in response to that question, well, here's why you can know that like the system is the way that it is, and it is secure, and here's the things we can improve, or things like that. So I think that kind of skepticism is expressed in various ways, but like there's something real there. There's a real filament there, and I really appreciate the expression of it.
Yeah, I agree with that. Thank you so much.
I can address that too.
Absolutely.
I do want to highlight for your audience that there's been a voting rights bill, given what Ian stated, to reconfigure pre-clearance sections 4 and 5 that will probably gain some traction in the next 2 years, depending upon who's in charge of Congress. And I do want to make sure I point that out, that as a mobilization strategy, including we should look at that, and it should include at least some provisions that address what Mr. Callaway pointed out in terms of voting machines and so forth like that, and receipts for votes and stuff like that. But from just a straight organizing perspective, part of it is we have to reconfigure how we organize And if you look at elections, we do GOTV work over here, we do voter education work over here, we do election protection work over here, and we work on these in these silos as if they're branches from different trees. And so when part of it is from an organizing perspective, organizers should be approaching elections as if, I call it voter justice, that's my term that I use, that election protection, voting rights, GOTV work, voter registration, voter education, all have to be branches of a broader tree of electoral justice or voter justice. And we just can't silo them off or only address them in the last week or 2 weeks of the campaign. So this entails, and there's some innovative ways to do this that people have already been working on, grassroots-led organizations that I can maybe talk about at another time. But part of it is just the way that we approach elections in the United States from a grassroots perspective. We silo activities, and what that ultimately means is that 80% of the work is on the front end of elections, GOTV work, get a voter registration, and 5 or 10% of the work is on election protection and voting rights. And it just that we can't operate like that to be effective in terms of election protection and voting rights. We can't.
I would also say I'm not a professor or anything like that, but I would say, like, also for me, I think a next step in our strategy, and I know Erica's been on it, but we have to really do the work of trying to secure a sound judiciary. Like, you're asking, who do we go to? If we don't, I've lost complete faith in this current administration at this point. I don't know about you. It's gone. So I don't expect them to watch over an election for me. That's just not something that I actually trust them to do. But we do have well-meaning groups like ACLU and other people, Law for Black Lives, that are like fighting these things in the legal system. But we also have to have a judiciary that actually believes in the soundness of our Constitution and the soundness of what voter protection is and what it should look like. We're in the midst of, most people don't really talk about this, but, there are implications for the way that we're voting and how, people are actually plotting a constitutional convention. Like, those things are in conversation and in motion. And so it does matter that, in Texas, they've elected 19 Black women as judges. Like, that matters. Some of that local groundwork to get our circuit courts and some of our local judiciary, the people that we actually bring our case of law to, are actually believe that we have a right to do that. It's super, super important. And so I can't even get past that or think past that. And a lot of our next strategies, I think, even regionally in the South, have been particularly around bail reform, around DA races, around prosecutors, around what our judicial system says about what we can say is out of bounds, out of line, and what isn't. And I think that's going to be a super important step going forward.
Yep, absolutely. And just the amazing work of TOPS and the organizations who have been working, I think, especially in places that elect judiciary, to do that work. So, yay. So we have about 10 minutes left. So I want to just close us out on a kind of higher note or optimistic note, which is just really quickly from each of the panelists, in a minute or so, what are you most hopeful about? So in this kind of terrain of electoral politics, of movement work, what are the things, either in this midterm or that you saw leading up to it or now, that you just are really inspired by and that make you hopeful? And then if we have time, we'll get to your question. If not, we will take it offline. But go ahead. Do you want to start? Who wants to start?
Okay. I'll start. The judicial electoral game has not traditionally how I've oriented myself, but I'm finding such hope and power in, like, the excitement that is generated. Like, people are asking questions, particularly about COB, as someone who identifies as an abolitionist, to really be able to ask the hard questions with people in the community about what does it look like when a police officer does harm in our community? What does transformative and restorative justice look like when we're talking about trying to deconstruct a criminal justice system that penalizes people, or community members that when you actually have a say, what choices do we make when we are given the the power to be judge, jury in that sense, like, what are kind of the larger, deeper questions around like how we're evolving our larger criminal justice system, for me has been such an illuminating space for me around how do we get creative? Where do we insert our alternatives and our interventions? Particularly for me, how do we build in a politic and analysis around abolition when community groups are coming together to talk about what harm is done and like how we mitigate that? So that's super real for me right now.
Yes. Thank you, Anna. Who wants to go next? Ian, you're off of mute.
Well, sure. I will say what gives me hope is that the dam feels like it is breaking. That like there are like the human beings who have been most disenfranchised, who have been most powerless through all the sort of annals of American history are like they're getting organized, and there is hope there. Like I realize we are reaching a crisis point, but one that I feel hopeful about. Like the fact that I'm on this like great discussion with this great group of people could not have been possible. Not even 5 years ago could not have been possible. 10 years ago, impossible. 20 years ago, a joke. And I feel great. Look, either the people on this webinar and the tendency that they represent the future, or we're doomed. And I like that choice because I feel like most people will, between doom and something reasonable, will choose something reasonable. And so to me, the great hope comes from the fact that like 2 years ago, if I had said, let's abolish ICE, people would have laughed in my face. 3 years ago, if I had said, did you know that Black Lives Matter and we should, like, that's a thing, people would have laughed in my face. 1 year ago, if I had said, we should expand the size of the Supreme Court because it is like dominated by reactionaries and is like evil, people would have said, you are being childish. The Overton window is expanding. Like the people are moving. The vanguard is building. The ramparts will not withstand us if we can stick together. And I'm a baby. I'm only 35 years old. I have not seen that much. But I'm telling you, this is an exciting time. It is a scary time. And what excites me is, like, we are moving the window. We are moving things. And what I most want to be is not a leader in this movement, but a foot soldier in it. I want to be like, I want to take my cues from others and to fight alongside, frankly, all of you. And it has been a great privilege of mine to be with you here. But there is something happening. And I'm not always so articulate in explaining it, but this is exciting.
Yes, thank you so much. Sekou?
Yeah, well, what I'm hopeful for this election, again, it's you saw this has always been around, but I think you're seeing it a little bit more sharpened. You're seeing, and the way best way I can describe it, just my third time saying it, is a Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party style of electoral organizing, which is different than traditional electoral politics, but takes grassroots organizing and direct action and synthesizes it with electoral politics while being rooted in indigenous grassroots leadership. So you've had, for example, Mi Gente, which is primarily a Latinx group that is doing great organizing. Did great organizing in Gwinnett County, for example, around Stacey Abrams did organizing all over the country. You see, Black Voter Matters has done transformative work in 7 states in the South, as well as leveraging their 501c4 PAC. I'm not sure which one they have for resources. The Movement Voters Project was connecting with a number of groups throughout the entire country, supporting electoral work. Electoral Justice Project for the Movement for Black Lives Matter has done great work. Here in Nashville, we've had Turk Votes, Tennessee Immigrant Refugee Rights Coalition Votes. AMAC has done great work. So you're seeing these groups that are rooted in this kind of indigenous grassroots organizing that's finding a way to leverage electoral organizing. I think the possibility, though there's a big question mark, is where do we go from here? And from my perspective, the hope and the possibility is that this work can effect not just getting candidates elected but as Rihanna said, judges, particularly local state judges, that are doing the right thing, but also stuff like just three things. Gentrification is hitting urban cities across the country. Redistricting is coming up in 2020, 2022. We need to look at models like Southern Echo, a community redistricting model that takes the exact same energy of MFDP, the Democratic Party, and uses that exact same energy to do fair redistricting plans, especially given what redistricting has done to both small and large urban cities, particularly Black communities. Disasters, the climate change and the permanence of natural disasters has affected how voting patterns emerge. From New Orleans, I was just in Panama City where my mother lives. That community is devastated by Hurricane Michael. And so really taking this electoral justice model and finding a way to both elect candidates that are favorable to us, but also to shape issues, whether it be through referendums, voter initiatives, or policy work, I think is where a lot of the hope can go.
Thank you so much for that. And last but not least, Michelle.
Well, y'all have said it, truly said it all. I think one of the biggest things for us this year was how collaboration was a core requirement to any kind of victory. Self-determination is the thing that I love, that it's a part of Kwanzaa, because my kids get to celebrate Kwanzaa year-round by saying self-determination every day. But that's been very central to our movements and the ways in which we practice governance. Because again, I want to advance rights, but even as those rights advance, it's for the sake of changing how my community functions. In St. Louis, public safety is the same thing as Black invisibility. The arrest and incarcerate model is the answer for everything that's dangerous. And I believe that by challenging and literally ousting someone who was a pillar, who was the chief upholder of the arrest and incarcerate model, through collaboration, we have advanced this idea that our rights are real. And it is true that we're still frustrated by when we get to the polls and how we vote, but our direct actions that took place from 2014 to 2016 on the streets of Ferguson all the way in to South St. Louis, where I am right now, we are able now to demand in ways that come with a boldness that I'm not sure we could have inherited without protests and without a long legacy of Black struggle. And so to me, self-determination is now being redefined in a way that's actually ancient, because it's always been communal. There's always been community power in the truth of what it means to join forces and to know that the power is always with the people. Probably my favorite thing about learning through the commitment of not just racial justice, but electoral justice, it has been the Electoral Justice League that Movement for Black Lives has supported through EJP. 12 people of a range of ages, who have a range of gender identities, who are all Black and Latinx. They have chosen to become organizers to reshape the idea that there is no political power at hand for Black people. And these 12 people spent a year studying, talking to different people. Marbury was one of them, people teaching them, shaping them, and then they went out and they participated in campaigns. And the moment that they began to realize that electoral justice is a tool, they began to boldly manipulate it for the sake of shifting the material conditions of Black people. And I believe that it is healthy for us to know why some folks simply don't vote. And it's healthy and important for us to know why we can make a change through electoral power. And so that hope, that boldness, and honestly, that style of collaboration that brings about the low ego that gives high impact, it's not cliche to me anymore. It's hopeful.
Yes, thank you so much for closing us out. I want to just take a second and thank all of the panelists and everyone who hopped on late on the Tuesday evening. I learned so much and appreciate all the work and thoughts and thinking that y'all are doing towards liberation for all of us. So thank y'all so much. And thank you for folks who joined us. Ray, we got your email, we'll answer it. And just sending everyone so much love and appreciation. Y'all's work fills me with hope. So thank you. And talk to y'all soon. Thanks for joining us.
It has been a pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Black love.
Black love.
Thank y'all. Appreciate it.
Yeah.